New Zealand. In the 1980s, 50, New Zealand eased import restrictions and reduced import tariffs on cars. Consequently, large volumes of used cars from Japan appeared on the local market at a time when most cars in New Zealand were locally assembled and expensive, compared to other countries, with most used cars available being comparatively old. Citation needed. Local buyers now have a much wider choice of models, but despite specifications being higher than so-called NZ new cars, there were many problems with clocking or odometer fraud, with the odometer wound back to display a much lower mileage. Other problems include vehicles damaged in accidents in Japan. 51. This is in contrast to those imported from Australia, for which the history of such vehicles, including write-offs, is readily available from insurance companies. 52. However, the widespread availability of used Japanese imports prompted official importers to reduce the price of brand new cars, and in 1998, New Zealand became one of the few countries in the world to remove all import tariffs on motor vehicles. 53. Gray market vehicles comprise a majority of cars in the national fleet. These second-hand imports have achieved normal status and are used and serviced without comment throughout society. A huge industry servicing and supplying parts for these vehicles has developed. After years of trying to stop gray imports, the car companies themselves have become involved, importing in competition with their own new models and providing owners with spare part and repair services. Russia and many African countries, albeit not South Africa, where second-hand car imports are illegal, import large quantities of second-hand vehicles from Japan and Singapore. Nevertheless, a great many used vehicles are imported, 94.6% of which come from Japan, most of which are Japanese makes. Most of the other makes are German, such as Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche and Volkswagen. 54. There are a smaller number of United States makes such as Chevrolet and Chrysler, which were built in right-hand drive for the Japanese market. 55. Although in heavy decline from 2005, used vehicle import totals are higher than those of vehicles first registered in New Zealand. In 2006, 123,390 ex-overseas vehicles were registered, compared to 76,804 brand-new vehicles. Citation needed. Used vehicles must, with some exceptions, be right-hand drive, and they must comply with recognized European, Australian, Japanese, or American emission and safety standards, or they are ineligible for import to New Zealand. 56, 57. In some cases a left-hand drive vehicle can be imported into New Zealand if it meets certain conditions or is a specialized vehicle. Left-hand drive vehicles 20 years or older normally do not have to meet any special requirements but must weigh no more than 3,500 kilograms.
Australia. In Australia, the commercial import of used motor vehicles is significantly regulated and restricted by the Department of Infrastructure. 64. The allowed imports are limited to what are called special and enthusiast vehicles, SEVs, or most cars manufactured before 1 January 1989, with the introduction of the 3rd edition Australian design rules. All vehicles imported into Australia must also be listed on the Register of Approved Vehicles. 65. Limitations of vehicles manufactured after 1 January 1989 was to ensure compliance with the regulations governing safety of vehicles on Australian roads that came into force on this date. 66. Until the present regulations entered force at the start of 2004, cars over 15 years old could be imported and would need to gain a vehicle inspection in Australia needed for registration transfer in many states anyway, and often safety modifications to ensure that they met with regulations that would have been in force at the time of their manufacture. 67. To bring a special or enthusiast vehicle into Australia, the importer must either apply to have the car added to the SEVS register or import a car already listed on the register. 68. All JDM vehicle to meet your requirements, and the new legislation has made legal to import any vehicle 25 years or older to the month of manufacture, fully exempt. This is applicable for all states for RHD vehicles and in Victoria and Western Australia for LHD vehicles as well. Vehicles can also be imported to Australia under what is known as a type approval. 69. This is generally used by remanufacturing companies who wish to import a vehicle that is commercially sold overseas and remanufactured for use in Australia. Examples of vehicles such as this are the Chevrolet Camaro, the Ram family of trucks, and the Ford F-Series. Grey imports can pose considerable challenges due to Australia using left-hand traffic as opposed to the more common right-hand traffic. This means that vehicles produced for compliance in a country that uses right-hand traffic would need a number of modifications to be compliant with the Australian design rules. 70. These modifications must be compliant with the Vehicle Standards Bulletin 14. 71. Primarily the components that relate to suspension and steering. 72. And lighting. 73. External territories. Australia's external territories include Christmas Island, the Cocos, Keeling Islands and Norfolk Island. You do not need to obtain an approval under the RVS legislation to import a road vehicle into an external Australian territory. However, you do need to obtain an approval to import a road vehicle into Australia from an Australian external territory. 75. Vehicles imported into Australia must be complied by a registered automotive workshop. 74. For use on the roads in Australia.